Hello everyone. There's been a bit of a gap between my YouTubey type things, but an issue that's arisen in Ireland of late probably needs a bit of talking about, and that is our use of language, and also the fact that the farmers in particular, or farming representatives, are kind of fighting back. And it seems to me that they're trying to sensationalize issues by using the language that some animal advocates will use, as it were, against us. There was a meeting once about, I don't know, it might be 7 years ago now, at some hotel in Dublin, and there was a meeting of representatives of the farming industry, vivisection, circus proprietors, etc., etc. And after that meeting, I noticed that there was a very standardized way of talking about vegans or veganism or animal advocacy in general, and this phrase, what they want is a meatless, petless world, became very frequent and popular within this kind of business. I've noticed now that what's going on is that they're saying that they're being frightened because animal advocates are issuing death threats or using words like rapist and Nazi and murderer, as it were, against them. There doesn't really seem to be much indication that they're actually receiving direct death threats. They're more trying to suggest that they're frightened by the language of vegans. I think this is quite a smart move on behalf of the farmers, and I think they're trying to sensationalize the language that we're using. And I think in cultural terms, I think they're probably onto something, in the sense that for whatever animal advocates will think about artificial insemination, to call it rape is probably culturally a bit naive and problematic. Because even though there are, from our point of view, we might say that if that procedure had happened to a human being, we might call it rape or sexual assault. Now, those things are probably quite true, and we might do that. But in terms of our claims making, we've also got to think about what effect that will have. And certainly now it seems the effect it has in a kind of rebound or backlash situation, where people who represent the user industries seem to have cottoned on to the idea that if they use this kind of language, it's going to make us look quite bad. And I think in that sense it's true. I mean, obviously we could argue the case, but I tend to think that the issue of rape and artificial insemination are two separate things. I think there's a lot more going on in relation to when a human being rapes another human being. It's to do with power relations, it's to do with humiliation, degradation, it's to do with sex sometimes, although obviously people always have said, rape is about power and not sex, but there's that kind of sexual element of it. Those things are not present in artificial insemination, even though it is the female reproduction system that has been affected by artificial insemination. And it is true again that if we wanted to say, if you did what you're doing to that cow, to a human being, then we would probably call it rape. Now, those things, once again, could well be true for our point of view, but in terms of our claims making, it's not a great thing. Thinking in terms of the Nazi thing, it's a very similar kind of idea. And of course we've got Eternal Trobinka, we've got famous quotes that say, other animals will probably think of human beings as a Nazi. But I think we ought to be very careful about the use of those things. It's not as though we're not on dodgy ground by just telling the truth. And if we want to talk about artificial insemination, or if we want to talk about farming systems, we can just talk about those things as they are. We don't have to invent phrases, like shock tactics. We don't have to say artificial insemination is rape. We don't have to say that farming other animals is akin to the Holocaust. We don't need to do that. In other words, the wrongness of them stands by themselves. And in fact, if we were more used to in our community talking about rights violations, then again we wouldn't probably need this feeling that we need to kind of shock people. Moral shocking is often the way that we try and recruit in this movement. But if we were more used to articulating the fact that we regard other animals as rights bearers, and that when we use them, however that is, then it's a rights violation, I think we probably might not need or feel the need to make these claims which are there to shock. I think we need to make claims which are there to educate and to get people thinking. And I'm not quite sure that we succeed in that, is if we make a claim which some people are just going to react to, and they're going to whoa, and it takes them a long time to process. Whereas I think if we were used to talking in terms of animal rights, then again it might take them a bit of time to process, but it would be done in a kind of educational way rather than as a result of being shocked and even horrified by the use of certain words. If they can make a case against the case for animal rights, but we can make the case for it. And again, we could obviously make the case to say that artificial insemination is rape. Whether it would be good tactics to do that is what I'm talking about, really. Certainly good tactics in my book to learn about animal rights and rights violations, language in terms of other animals being rights bearers, rights holders. Those things I think are beneficial. I'm not so convinced in using words that are almost like deliberately meant to shock people, and certainly now there's a backlash to it where they're almost like saying, he called me a rapist, she called me a rapist, and that almost like closes down a conversation rather than opens it up, because then you end up on the media having to say whether you agree with other animal advocates using that kind of language, rather than doing what you really want to do, which is to talk about animal use and the fact that animal use is a rights violation. So that's my YouTubey thing for this time. I'll see you again, and take care everyone. Bye.